this discussion pertains only to the T3 above and N plus. In other words, the stage 2B to stage 3C, which we call as a locally advanced locoregional cancers, locally advanced rectal cancers. This is not going to be applicable for, this is not going to be applicable for tumors which are small and which will be basically going for a surgery upfront. The discussion is fundamentally about the T3s above and the N plus above. And these are the areas where the outcomes are not very great. Now, if you go back, this is I think from 83 if I'm not wrong, there was this nice study to show that what kind of failures happen when you treat a locally advanced locoregional colorectal cancer, rectal cancer. The distribution of failures is to be almost equal between distant metastasis and locoregional metastasis. About 30% would fail locally, about another 30% would fail distantly. However, if you see the patterns of failure over time, presently there's a major change in the way the recurrences happen, and the local recurrence is no more a major problem. The major problem continues to be metastasis, but local recurrence has become much less of a problem over time. And can anyone tell me why this has happened? The fundamental reason why this shift has happened is because of two things. One thing is use of radiotherapy, and other thing is shifting from normal surgeries to total mesorectal excisions. So therefore, surgically speaking, the watershed is TME. If you have done TME, the significant drop in local recurrence, also added by the local control of radiotherapy that it offers, has totally changed the approach in which you address the failures in cancer, local rectal cancers. And if you see how the radiation has played a role over time, the evolution, basically, the key trials. One is 1997, the trial, the so-called Swedish rectal cancer trial, that showed that short course alone improves outcome over surgery alone. And then the Dutch trial showed that SCRT also improves local control over TME. And this is a pre-TME data, this is TME data, post-TME data. Then came the German rectal cancer study, SOA rectal study, which conclusively proved the role of short course neoadjuvant. Long course neoadjuvant, as opposed to post-op. And this is the CRC 07, which actually asked two questions, and I will show CRC 7 down the line. So till this point of time, things were static. And then suddenly you have of course, there is one trial I can never forget, is the Mercury trial. The radiologist is there, left. So the Mercury trial, which told you that how MRI is absolutely vital for knowing the CRM. And of course, now is the question of a couple of few important trials, the Rapido and the Prodige, which has brought us discussion back to the TNT question. And we always love to have simple guidelines to tell us what to do, and the standards of care. Now, how the standards of care develop? Now, you see the possibilities that I have spoken in the first few slides is that while surgery remains the mainstay, you have an option of giving either a pre-op versus a post-op. Either you can give a long course or a short course. You can delay the radiation and the surgery and see whether it has got a beneficial effect. You can give the chemotherapy from the back and bring it to the front, or omit chemotherapy, delay the surgery, give chemoradiation versus only radiation, remove surgery altogether, and bring the chemotherapy from back to front. These are all the questions that can happen, which actually looks like locoregional rectal cancer is a very complex scenario. So I will only address a few of them, and let us see what are those. The post-op versus pre-op question is so-called the SOA rectal trial in 2004, which basically offered a long course chemoradiation and then 8 weeks of waiting and then surgery versus TME followed by radiation. This is what I would assume that most of the people here in Bangladesh as well in India would be doing till a couple of years ago, that you give a full 5 weeks of radiotherapy, chemotherapy, and then follow it up by surgery. And that time, SOA clearly showed that the 5-year survival remains the same, but the significant jump in the local control. The local control, apart from the local control, the other area where the major difference happened was the grade 3 and grade 4 toxicities and strictures anatomic side. they found out that giving the radiation before surgery is far less toxic than giving it after radiotherapy. So you have two key gains, that your surgery, your adjuvant therapy, when it is given before the surgery, is far less toxic, and it improves local control. And these are the two consistent themes that will be played along again and again and again for last 20 years. All that you have got is slight modification of these two themes. Trials have come and trials have gone, approaches have come and approaches have gone. The fundamental gain has remained that you have less toxicity if you give radiation and chemotherapy before, and you have better local control. There is no improvement in the overall survival. There is no improvement in the overall survival, and this is updated after 11 years update of the Rectal trial. You had the same thing, that the survival does not change, and improve local control in the multimodality versus same thing. The Emerson CR07 is a British trial which actually addressed two questions at a time. It not only addressed the question of neoadjuvant versus adjuvant, it also asked the question of whether short course as a neoadjuvant is good enough. So what it did was this, yes, TMA was the mainstay. You either give 25 in 5 just before the radiation, or you did the TMA, just before the surgery, or you did the TMA and then give a traditional radiotherapy 45 and 25, which is risk adapted if the CRM is positive. Well, the outcomes are pretty much expected, that you have better local regional control in pre-op, and the disease-free survival and overall survival had no difference. So as I told you, this is the same thing that we played again and again and again. Question is that, can we reduce the duration of the radiotherapy to a short course? Well, if I look at the meta-analysis of all the short course versus long course, short course trials, there is a clear watershed, as I told you. In the pre-TME day, the overall survival as well as local regional control improved. But once TME came into the picture, there was no more impact of radiation on the overall survival because the surgeon was taking care of it. The only thing that was improved was the local regional control. The Dutch trial also showed better local regional control and no OS difference. There was only slight OS difference in the stage 3. What about direct combination of short course versus long course, both as a neoadjuvant? The two trials that looked at it was the TROG and the Polish trial, and while they looked at slightly different things, one of them actually looked at sphincter preservation. But the outcome from both of them were that there is no difference in overall survival or local recurrence. Same thing with the Polish trial. No difference in the overall survival, DFS or local regional control. In other words, you can safely remove long course from your program and replace it with short course. Now, this has been proven more than 15-16 years ago. Actually almost 20 years ago. This Polish trial told that short course had more CRM positivity, but at the same time, long course actually had more toxicity. Now, this is a common fear. People say that if you give lot of dose, 25 grain, 5 fractions only, will the patient have more toxicity? The answer is just the opposite. Actually, short course patients have less toxicity compared to long course patients, and we do short course in a great way. And I will tell you what is my experience. This is just from one trial, and it is not so straightforward. It's a little bit nuanced to it, and I will tell you what it is. So, if you are looking at any guideline before 2020, the answer to this would be radiotherapy plus chemotherapy followed by TME is the optimal sequence in stage 2 and stage 3 rectal cancers. Any doubt about this line? I guess no. Short course is a very, very valid alternative. True. Short course should be avoided for bulky or no tumors where CRM could be a challenge, because we have seen that CRM positivity is more at least in one of them. And patients who are having poor general condition, their radiotherapy and chemotherapy should be avoided because they have more toxicities. Now, if you do this today, you are absolutely not wrong. And the vast number of the people will continue to do this, and you are absolutely right. Having said that, we looked at one more thing, which is what? If you get this chemotherapy which was given after the surgery and bring it before it, now what is the rationale behind it? What is the rationale behind it? Because till now we have seen that giving radiotherapy, neoadjuvant chemotherapy, and then following it up, it does the job pretty well. And if you already reached a plateau, you're doing it pretty well. Why do you want to do it? Why do you want to throw everything at one go? And why does the 2022 NCCN guideline tell you that you offer all the treatment, the chemotherapy, radiotherapy, everything before surgery? The rationale behind it is that when you take a patient of T3 or T4 or patient with a threatened CRM or patients who are N+, this subgroup of patients, you are going to give them adjuvant chemotherapy after surgery anyway. And we already know that any treatment that is done before the surgery is better tolerated. You will possibly get better resectability because you are throwing everything before the surgery and the tumor may shrink further, and we have better resectability for borderline resectable cases where patients have threatened CRMs. There is a possibility of a biological selection. That is something that everyone loves. And maybe your beneficial outcomes will be beneficial. Maybe your OS will go up, maybe your DFS will go up. These are the thoughts. So with these thoughts, there was a flurry of total neoadjuvant therapy, both randomized trials as well as phase 2 trials over the last 10 years. And there are at least 7 randomized controlled trials that have been done, 4 retrospective trials, and 4 prospective trials which are phase 2s. And taking them together, at least 5 meta-analyses have been published, of which the 2 trials that get discussed maximum are the so-called Rapido trial and the Prodigy trial. And why are they so? I would assume this is the most sensible of the 2 trials, of all the 7 randomized trials that have been done. And these are the 2 trials that I will discuss today, and everyone discusses these 2 trials only, and I will also do the same thing. First is the Rapido. Now Rapido is a very straightforward trial. Rapido, what it does is that it takes all the T4 and the T4B patients, T3 patients, N2 patients who have positive MRF, where they have EMVA positivity, because EMVA positivity is one of the criteria that determines local regional relapse and lymph node positive. The primary endpoint was treatment failure, time to treatment failure. And what it did was that it took standard long course radiotherapy, after that it waited for 8 weeks, then offered TAB, and then after that they offered them Capox or Folfox. So this is the standard arm, and the short course arm was short course radiotherapy for 5 days, wait for 2 weeks, and then give them Capox or Folfox. This was a discretion of the physician for about 6 weeks, and then wait for another 2 to 4 weeks, and then do the TAB. And because the entire neoadjuvant therapy is brought in before the TAB, it is obviously called a total neoadjuvant treatment. What are the Rapido results? The Rapido results are the disease-related treatment failure, which was the primary endpoint, had a benefit. Distant metastasis had a benefit. What it did not show benefit about was local regional failure and overall survival. Now, if you go back to the pre-TNT data, the long course data that you saw from Sawyer et al. And the MRC07 trial, there you also saw that you already have achieved a degree of control of the local regional failure. TNT has not improved upon that. Overall survival has already flattened out, and the TNT has not improved upon that. What it has done is, because obviously you are giving more chemotherapy, you are getting a little bit more improvement in the distant metastasis, and the disease-related treatment failure was also higher. Coming to the Prodigy trial. Now Prodigy is slightly different from the Rapido in that it is much more intensive. What it does is that it again takes patients with the T3 or T4, and the primary endpoint was disease-free survival. The standard arm was short course chemo radiation, 7 weeks of waiting, TAB followed by Capox or Folfox. The experimental arm was much more complex. TAB remains the mainstay, but there was 6 cycles of M-Folfirinox, followed by a standard long course therapy, and then again after the surgery given Capox or Folfox. So this is far more intense compared to the Rapido. So do you expect any changes in Rapido, in Prodigy? Well, the answer is pretty much same as what Rapido achieved. In spite of being much more intensive treatment, it did 2 things. That it got again a little bit of a DFS improvement, which is the primary endpoint of the trial. It also got metastasis-free improvement, which I'm not surprised given how intensive was the chemotherapy. But in spite of all that, the overall survival did not improve. So possibly for T3, T4, M plus rectal cancers, we have reached a plateau with the addition of surgery, radiotherapy, and auxiliary-based chemotherapies. We have possibly reached a plateau that if you want to improve overall survival, you have to think something out of the box, out of these things. So overall survival remaining where it is, all these trials have played around with the DFS, local regional control, and so on and so forth, which is not something bad, because local recurrence in colorectal cancer is devastating. It is devastating. So if you can actually achieve additional local control in colorectal cancer, it is not something that you should ignore. Okay? You cannot say, oh, it has got no overall survival, I don't control it. No, definitely not. However, this still leaves us open questions. And what are these questions? What do we need to know more? We still need to know about ORF. We need to know about what is happening to the local regional failure individually. The DFS, we don't have much data of toxicity from any of the TNT trials. What is the impact of CRM? The Prodigy had clear-cut, the Rapido had clear-cut directions about the CRM, but Prodigy did not have. How do you deal with PAT-CRs? There's not a PAT-CR there. And how do you deal with patients who have R0 disease? So, and whether still you should go for a long course TNT or a short course TNT. In other words, Prodigy type TNT or the Rapido type TNT. So these are the things we need to know more. And none of these trials answer individually these questions. So therefore, we have to take help of the massive number of meta-analyses that are there. So all these 5 meta-analyses, ironically, none of the meta-analyses answer all the questions that are raised. So what I did was that I read all the meta-analysis and I broke them into the question that they are trying to answer. First question is that the OS benefit. Well, the 2 meta-analyses that looked at the OS benefit, one of them showed that there was no OS benefit, other of them showed that there was OS benefit. Now, like all meta-analysis, you have to depend on the strength of the meta-analysis to determine whether you should take it as a gospel truth or not. But maybe not, there is a possibility of a little bit of improvement of overall survival. What about DFS? Well, there is no doubt about it. All the neoadjuvant trials, they show that total neoadjuvant trials, that the disease-free survival has improved. There is no denying that. What about R0 resection? You might think that with such aggressive chemotherapy and radiotherapy, the R0 resection is going to be better. Actually, there is no benefit. I guess it boils down to case selection. If you have selected a case which is having, say, for example, massive amount of EMVI, or which is having a massive amount of CRM at threat, it is not going to change it. Local control, as we told in the initial slide, that the local control itself is so good now with TB and any form of radiation, the chances of improving upon the local control was not very high, and therefore there was no benefit. What about distant metastasis? Yes, possibly TNT is having an impact on distant metastasis because we have given so much of chemotherapy, the distant metastasis rates are less. What about PAT-CR? Now this is the beauty of it. All the TNT protocols cutting across the board, be it Prodigy, be it any of the trials, all of them have shown significantly higher rate of pathological control, pathological complete response. Now this is pretty much like what has happened in the breast, where you have dual HER2, where you are able to get more pathological response, and possibly that translates into outcomes. Same thing has happened. There is a massive amount of the amount of pathological complete response is by and large double of TNT versus non-TNT, and this is something that possibly needs more exploration. And the funny thing is that it is a short course that has got more pathological complete response. You might think that a long duration of treatment will give you more pathological complete response. It is not. It is actually the short course which is giving you high pathological complete response. There is no difference in sphincter preservation. Sometimes people come and say that if I give so much of treatment before the surgery, will I be able to get more sphincter preservation? The answer to that is they are the same. Now, to summarize, what do we know about TNT? Well, we know that it increases the DFS, it increases metastasis-free survival, it increases pathological response rates by double. There is, at this point of time, acute toxicity, there is no difference, long term we don't know. However, it does not increase the local regional control and it does not increase overall survival. This is a summary of all the TNT. The benefits are significant for us to pursue TNT, there is no doubt about it. Keeping that in mind, both ESMO and NCCN tells you that you should be considering TNT as your standard treatment for patients who are T3, T4 and patients who are N positive. So, does everyone think so? The answer to that is that even before the Prodigy and the Rapid were published, adoption of TNT has been going on at a rapid pace in US in the academic centers. Now, in non-academic centers, the uptake is little less, but in the academic centers, they have started to adopt rapidly for favor of TNT. So TNT has definitely come to stay, but there is certain things we do not know about TNT. What are those things that we do not know? One thing is that why there is no better local control in spite of higher PCR. If you have higher pathological complete response, logically that should translate into a higher local control, but there is none. Possibly because you have already plateaued out, but still there is a question. Why there is no better overall survival in spite of having higher metastasis-free survival? So these are logical questions which possibly are not answered because these trials were not designed to address these questions. And why there is no better sphincter control in spite of having higher pathological CR? Why there is no better R0 resection in spite of higher pathological CR? We still don't know about long-term toxicities. And what about the discrimination between the lower versus the upper tumors? Because the lower tumors and the upper tumors may require different kind of approach. While these questions are not answered primarily because the trials were not primarily designed to answer these questions, the real takeaway from the TNT trial lies in this 25% PATH CR. Now this asks you a question that are we overdoing a local therapy? Are we offering too much aggressive local therapy and therefore we are getting the PATH CR? Or is there a possibility that this is looking at a biological selection telling you that who are the patients who will do so well with chemotherapy and radiotherapy aggressively done that they will not need any further surgery? So is TNT actually a tool for identifying patients for wait and watch treatment and a sphincter preservation? Now this is the question that possibly the coming trials will answer, which is why I feel that the TNT is actually a step towards answering a much bigger question. Now when I was preparing the slides for one of my postgraduate teaching program, the day that I was about to present this lecture, 2 days before that came a bombshell. Is this paper, which actually showed that the local regional failure rate in Rapido is very high. Now this brought in a question that is Rapido really good? Is there something that we're missing? And the biggest question was asked by the surgeons, and if you see the type of failure that happened, not only the patients who had, if you have a patient who is having R plus, resection, then you would expect that there will be high degree of local failure. Even patients with R0, they also had high degree of local failure. Now, there were a lot of questions as to why this happened. People have even asked that whether we should stop TNT after looking at this trial. Well, it is too early to say that. And I will tell you why this has to be looked into its proper perspective. What went wrong with Rapido? When you look back at Rapido, there are many things that would have raised a red flag there and there itself, and you would have possibly predicted this is coming. Because in the experimental group, there were more mesorectal breaches. Now if you have more mesorectal breach, there is always a chance of heart failure. Yes. So there are more mesorectal breach in the experimental group. There were more extrapelvic large lymph nodes, which are similar to actually having a metastatic disease, and they have higher failure rates. So there are more extrapelvic large lymph nodes. Ideally speaking, that extrapelvic large lymph node being a known risk factor should have been stratified, which was not done. So it is essentially a failure of a design which led to this. And there was a mix of 3D CRT versus IMRT. I'm not going into the details of that, but when they did post-spectral analysis, they found out the patients who had actually undergone 3D CRT, their lymph nodes were underdosed versus the patients who had gone IMRT. So there was a difference in the way the radiation was given, and that had brought in a degree of bias. There's also the question of not all of the patients did finish all the 6 cycles. There were patients who finished up to 4 cycles, and if you could finish 4 cycles, the patient was eligible for the analysis. So whether there's a difference between patients who have undergone 4 cycles versus 6 cycles, and because you had such a high pathological CR rate, you would assume that many of the patients possibly did not need 6 cycles. So whether there is a role of mid-term tumor response grade assessment with MRI. These are the questions that will possibly answer why there was a higher local regional failure. But of all the things that has been proposed maximally is this concept of the fragmented repopulation. Now, you look at what happens when you're giving a standard long course followed by surgery. You have a disease, this is the muscular propria, the tumor is contained inside, radiation is given. Within 12 to 8 weeks, the surgeon performs surgery, taking out the muscular propria, which is a TNT approach. When you offer TNT, first of all, you have chosen slightly higher risk patients where there is a muscular breach, and then you are giving a 24 weeks of gap. Now, while some patients have received full response in 6 cycles, and some patients have continued to receive responses till some patients have received full response at 4 cycles, some have continued to receive response up to 6 cycles. There's a subgroup of patients who are breaking through the response, and they, what we know as, have a fragmented repopulation of the tumor in a such long gap given. And there the surgeon is in no position to know which is that patient. And as he does a TME, some of the tumors have escaped. Now, when we had this discussion with our surgeons as to what is their experience when they are operating their TNT patients, they found that this TNT patient's surgery is significantly different than doing a patient who has been on a standard long course. And they found there is much more fibrosis. You cannot find the planes easily. So you have to modify your surgical approach and adapt to the fact that the long duration that you have given, that 3 months of duration that you have given, 4 months of duration that you have given, you have to change your surgical fields. So ours being an academic center and being a center focused on trials, data and publication, soon it came upon our department to analyze our data, which we did. Now this slide that I'm showing now is our trial when we had accrued 35 patients for TNT. The analysis was done with 13 or 14 patients completing the treatment. Please don't take these photographs because it is gone for publication and it's published actually right now. So it is actually published right now. And now we have completed more than 50 patients and the updated data will be sent for publication now. So what we did was that we did the standard rapid protocol because it is simple. And we looked at the descriptive statistics, compliance to radiotherapy, compliance to chemotherapy, compliance to surgery. We looked at the response both in pathological as well as the MRI response. So what we found was that we have found that 27% have complete pathological response, which is in line with what you have seen in the Rapido. Most importantly, there's very, very high concurrence between the MR TRG and the pathological TRG. The pathological response rates and the MR response rates, so there's the statistical test run to show very high degree of significance, which led us to believe that if you do an MRI and it shows you good response, maybe you can select these patients for wait and watch. That is the number one thing that we learned. The second thing that we learned, as these short course radiation patients, their toxicities are different. They are different because this is a question, as I was discussing in the breakfast time, somebody asked me that why there is less of adoption of short course. And one of the answers is that people fear that they have more toxicity. While the data shows that the toxicity is not more, actually it's the opposite. In our experience, I will say that the toxicity is different. What is the meaning of different? If you are doing a short course followed by very next week surgery, you are not going to see any toxicities. That is good. But if you are going to go for a K-pox, followed like the Rapido protocol, then typically 3 to 4 weeks down the radiation day, when the first cycle or the second cycle of K-pox starts, they have much more diarrhea than compared to what would be the normal case. Now, this is possibly, and this is pure hypothesis, this is possibly because the K-pox and the short course are adding up. And after a few patients we experience that, what we have done is that we have become more aggressive in managing the post-radiation toxicities. So what we do is that keep these patients on analgesics, anti-inflammatories, we keep these patients on chimoral, which is chymotrypsin, and maintain them very, very closely. And the moment they start having diarrhea, we intervene. Now we are managing that toxicity pretty well, and it is just about adapting your response to the kind of toxicity that we will have. So that's it. That's my presentation. Thank you very much.